Hi, my name is Sarah Mayerhofer. I'm a graduate student at Arizona State University pursuing my master's in sustainability leadership. Today I'll be talking about the Catholic Church and the global context. And this project is called Stewards of the Environment. And we'll be talking about the Diocese of the Rockville Center as an example. An overview of this project. The topic will be covering strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, global trends, and recommendations for this organization. The audience will be Bishop Barris, who is the bishop of the Diocese of Rockville Center, so he's in charge of basically everything there. And it is also for the stakeholders, which will be the parishioners in this case. Parishioners are people who frequently go to church and are donating to that organization. And the organization itself is the Diocese of Rockville Center. We'll be using that as an example today, but we'll be using them only as an example, as the rest of the parishes around the world can also follow this. So I'd like to start off by talking about the vision and mission of the Catholic Church. It's hard to put the vision into just one brief paragraph because it is such a rich and really old religion. So we'll be talking about the 7 social justice teachings. And the last social justice teaching is care for the creation. We show our respect for the Creator by our stewardships of creation. Care for the earth is not just Earth Day slogan. It is a requirement of our faith. We are called to protect people and the planet, living our faith in relationship with all of God's creation. This environmental challenge has fundamental moral and ethical dimensions that cannot be ignored. So this teaching also incorporates with a few other teachings as Catholic people, a Catholic community centered around taking care of the poor and vulnerable. We see that climate change is affecting these people first. So today we'll be using this care for creation as a sort of vision for the organization as a whole. So on this slide I have a map of the world, and we can see the population of Catholic people throughout the world. You can see in Latin, South, and Central America there is a very high population of Catholic people. And you also see in Europe and Africa, it's a pretty high population. Africa is a relatively new population for Catholic people. So this will be a global trend for the organization for continued access to clean water for them. It's a big trend right now within the organization. And then we'll also see the star here in North America. That is where the Diocese of Rockville Center is located, so that's the example we'll be using today. It's also important to look at these numbers and realize that because people in 2013 either said that they were Catholic or they claimed to be culturally Catholic, that not everyone is going to Mass or services every week, and that these numbers probably aren't so accurate to who is a parishioner to each church. And this is important to know because a recent Huffington Post article claims that about 39% of Catholics reported attending church in any given week, according to data collected between 2014 and 2017, and that's down from 45% between 2005 and 2008. And it's also a huge drop from 1955, when Gallup polling reported weekly Mass attendance was at 75%. So when we're looking at this organization as a whole, it's not doing so well. Numbers have dropped quite dramatically, but people still see some sort of, connection to the organization. So looking at global trends, we can see 2 major global trends that relate to this organization. The first is poverty, the second is clean water access. So we're going to look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We first read this in a few modules ago. I saw it in the Global Opportunity Report of 2018, and then went on to look onto the UN Sustainable Developmental Goals. And the first goal there is to end poverty. So on the website it says that more than 700 million people, or 10% of the world's population, still lives in extreme poverty and is struggling to fulfill the most basic needs like health, education, access to water, and sanitation, to name a few. The majority of people living on less than $1.90 a day to live in a sub-Saharan Africa. Worldwide, the poverty rate in rural areas is 17.2%, more than 3 times higher in urban areas. So this relates to my organization because it goes right back to the core ideologies, and that's taking care of the vulnerable. So I can relate this to the fourth Catholic social justice teaching, which is option for the poor and vulnerable, and it's telling us to put the needs of the poor before our own. Next, clean water access. This is also a UN Sustainable Development Goal, number 6, which is clean water and sanitation. This is described on the website as a few different ways, and also related to some natural disasters. It says flood and other water-related disasters account for 70% of all deaths related to natural disasters. And 3 in 10 people lack access to safely managed drinking water services, and 6 in 10 people lack access to safely managed sanitation facilities. This can be related to a lot of different teachings and morals within Catholicism, but I think it most directly relates to the first Catholic social teaching, which is life and dignity. This is also often related to euthanasia and right to life kind of issues, but I see this as a right to life issue as well. If we believe that water is a human basic right, then it should be accessible to all people. So we'll be looking at these two as 2 global trends moving forward. So now we'll take a look at Pope Francis, who is the leader of the Catholic Church right now. He has been in the Vatican since 2013, and ever since has made some really radical and liberal moves. He is seen as the most liberal and progressive pope the church has ever seen. With that, he's not shied at all from conversation about climate change, and he's quite vocal with the way that he feels about defending the earth. 2 years into his career as a pope, he wrote Laudato Si, which translates to Care of Our Common Home. It's a 37,000 word encyclical letter to 5,100 bishops. And this letter was basically instructions to the bishops to care for the environment, to share this with their parishes. And many bishops chose to either ignore this or really kind of barely bring it up within their community. Paul Hawken, a well-known climate change writer, mentions Pope Francis in his book Drawdown, and he dedicated 2 pages for an excerpt of Laudato Si. Hawken writes that thousands of books and articles have addressed climate change in the past 40 years. However, when Pope Francis wrote on a Care for Our Common Home, his encyclical letter on the environment, it was as if a veil of obscuring jargon was lifted. The scientific issues of global warming was given a fully human dimension, thoughtful and caring. He also writes, Laudato Si is a message from the Church, to be sure, and it is a message from the heart, suffused with compassion and unflinching in its analysis of the causes of global warming and its unjust and inequitable impact on the poor. In this message, global warming is illustrated perhaps for the first time as a universal, a moral issue, and not an environmental issue. And then over here, I just have a picture of Pope Francis meeting Greta Thunberg in April, and she talks about his her encounter with him, saying that he was very kind and that he told her to keep on going and fighting for what's right. So it just kind of gives you some insight about who the leader is right now.
I created two big, hairy, audacious goals as strategic sustainability tools to help achieve the goals of the organization. The first is a zero waste business recognition. This comes from the Zero Waste Alliance, and it's required for every Catholic building to get this recognition. So this will be going into parishes, churches, schools, recreation centers, and making sure that there is no diverting to landfills, that there's composting for food waste, and that there is recycling in all forms, and that there's not any excess of like office supplies or papers, things like that. The second is to reduce carbon emissions by 50% within the organization. So this can be done a few different ways. What I mostly see is the organization investing in renewable energy, specifically solar and wind power energy. And this could be pretty easy for some parishes to invest in, depending on location. And something else creative to look at would be implementing energy fasts within schools and teaching students at a young age the importance of energy conservation, and that that energy does come from a dangerous power source. Um, and another way to reduce carbon emissions outside of just the organization at home is to kind of change the structure of a mission trip. So, for those of you who may not know, mission trips are at the core of Catholicism. It goes back to those social teachings and some of our early teachings, going into developing countries or maybe less developed cities nearby, and raising money for that community, bringing that community certain items that they need. So I would do big clothing drives, like winter coat drives in Long Island for the homeless communities. And so my idea is changing the mission trips to kind of be sustainable. So going into parts of Africa and bringing solar panel supplies with that mission group, and then setting up solar panels there so that they don't have to worry about electricity, or you know, or they can have electricity for the first time. So I think this could be a really cool way to reduce carbon emissions, because it's incorporating the core ideologies of Catholicism, and it's also incorporating reducing carbon emissions, which is one of the leading sources of climate change. We achieve these big, hairy, audacious goals. When it comes to combining both zero waste and carbon reduction, I think the best way to go about that would be a life cycle assessment. That way, it looks through the entire organization, and you can see what areas need to be worked on, what energy is being used the most, and it gives you some tangible results to display. We learned about this a few modules ago, and you can see the patterns that they have for businesses, and I think this will be the most sustainable and efficient way for my organization. Autodesk Sustainability Workshop defines life cycle assessment as a method to quantify the environmental impacts of a product or service, such as greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, land use, toxins, and more. A life cycle assessment will look at the materials and processing, production, transportation, energy, and resource use during life and end of life. I think this will especially help parishioners see the investment and will have a significant impact and on return when it comes to solar power and wind power. Given what Pope Francis wants for the church and for the planet, I think this is the best way to get there. A cradle to grave assessment would be the best fit because it allows the entire life cycle of an item or system to be analyzed. This is also great for the organization because the numbers and statistics will be able to back up the theories or ideas that will be implemented. There are many challenges when it comes to the organization of the Catholic Church. I think there will always be some sort of challenges or obstacles when working with a religious organization. The Catholic Church definitely has their fair share of challenges at the moment. The church is very divided, as well as the country. Many people have stopped going to church due to political stances, and some priests have preached, and many people are still upset about the sex abuse scandals, rightfully so. Before we looked at the map, and I mentioned that fewer people than ever are coming to church. So that's been a challenge for the diocese on many levels, especially financially. And another concern is that the parishioners, particularly the older ones, don't see the issue of climate change as really a global issue. When we look at Africa, which is the largest population of growing Catholics, but many people don't even have access to clean water there. So when a challenge of bringing some renewable energy may not be as welcomed or respected as going over there and bringing them the basics. So that might be a global challenge, bringing these kind of developed thoughts and products into countries that may not have seen anything like this before. So I have to go about that in a certain way, and looking at political views as well within the church is always a challenge. Looking at another strategic sustainability tool, we can use zero waste to achieve the zero waste business model. So, zero waste includes producing no municipal trash. This will include composting within facilities, only electronic communication, so no more paper within offices, and reusing resources specifically within churches, so reusing songbooks, Bibles, things like that. So it creates a bit of a circular economy. This is definitely a big, audacious goal. It would have to include an enormous amount of education and investment, dedication to reducing waste. Ultimately, my recommendation would be to have a consultant go into each parish and look at the facet of the parish and see where their energy output is, and then what can be done through the LCA as well. I think this is also a strategy that will help achieve both goals. Zero waste will help reduce carbon, and it will definitely help the first goal of the zero waste recognition. So now we look at opportunities. There are endless challenges, but there are also endless opportunities when it comes to these goals. First and foremost, it's following the mission and the core ideologies of the church by acting on what leaders tell us to. Pope Francis wants us to put the poor and vulnerable before anything else by acting on climate change, because he knows that science proves that climate change will affect the poorest and the most vulnerable people first. This is an opportunity for people to come back into the organization. I know people have been distant or hurt by the church and by scandals the past 20, 30 years, and they need something to bring them back in. I say changing a stance on something like climate change and being really vocal about it will bring in some more liberal, more democratic kind of people. So as you can see in this graph, the Catholic Church is many of the reasons why people say that they've left the church is that the church has lacked on making significant changes in these global issues. So here we have allowing Catholics to use birth control, allowing priests to get married, things like that. So you can see how big these percentages are, and I would imagine that lack of environmental activism is on there as well. So I think any drastic change will really draw people in and allow them to feel like they can come back to this organization. When it comes to strengths, the Catholic Church has many when it comes to a global scale. Although there are many challenges, there are also many strengths, and these goals are very strong, so we need a lot of opportunities to get them. The Catholic Church has extremely dedicated employees around the world. When I worked there, I would have done anything to see an environmental activism done within the church. Although people may not be going to church as often, there is still a strong connection between churches, no matter the religion, and their community. Because it is a religious organization, the Catholic Church is tax exempt. So, looking at investments in renewable energy with the Catholic Church, you wouldn't have to be paying taxes for that. Another strength is religion and pursuing those options. Another strength is the vast presence of the church across the world. So, this is another global strength, is that the Catholic Church is known everywhere, and that there are Catholic churches on every continent and almost every country. So the word actually goes a long way. Um, Lastly, Pope Francis is a big strength. He is seen as a very vocal and radical pope. He stands up for social justice issues like no other pope has before, and he's willing to fight for climate justice. So this is a huge strength when it comes to reaching those big audacious goals. And on a global level, it's a big strength to have a pope that can speak 8 different languages and is well versed in global and local issues. I created 2 big, hairy, audacious goals as strategic sustainability tools to help achieve the goals of the organization. The first is a zero waste business recognition. This comes from the Zero Waste Alliance, and it's required for every Catholic building to get this recognition. So this will be going into parishes, churches, schools, recreation centers, and making sure that there is no diverting to landfills, that there's composting for food waste, and that there is recycling in all forms, and that there's not any excess of like office supplies or papers, thing like that. The second is to reduce carbon emissions by 50% within the organization. So this can be done a few different ways. What I mostly see is the organization investing in renewable energy, specifically solar and wind power energy. And this could be pretty easy for some parishes to invest in, depending on location. And something else creative to look at would be implementing energy fasts within schools and teaching students at a young age the importance of energy conservation, and that that energy does come from a dangerous power source. And another way to reduce carbon emissions outside of just the organization at home is to kind of change the structure of a mission trip. So, for those of you who may not know, mission trips are at the core of Catholicism. It goes back to those social teachings and some of our early teachings, going into developing countries or maybe less developed cities nearby, and raising money for that community, bringing that community certain items that they need, So I know we do big clothing drives like winter coat drives in Long Island for the homeless communities. And so my idea is changing the mission trips to kind of be sustainable. So going into parts of Africa and bringing solar panel supplies with that mission group, and then setting up solar panels there so that they don't have to worry about electricity or um, you know, or they can have electricity for the first time. So I think this could be a really cool way to reduce carbon emissions because it's incorporating the core ideologies of Catholicism, and it's also incorporating reducing carbon emissions, which is one of the leading sources of climate change. Here I've created a diagram using Diocese Rockwell Center as an example. I've estimated the amount of employees across the island that either work in the headquarters of the diocese or work on their own in their own parishes but follow the diocesan rules. So came up with a number of about 1,787 employees. Just a bit of an estimate on the pastoral employees, but the rest of the numbers are confirmed. And then we're gonna multiply that number by 2.25 pounds. Took this number from the EPA. The EPA projects that an average American produces, on average, 4.48 pounds of waste per day. So for this example, we're going to take half of that and say that people produce half of that waste at work. So again, a little bit of an estimate there. And then we're going to multiply that number by 260 days, which is the average amount of days that an American works. And we come up with a little over 1,000,000 pounds. So that's 1,000,000 pounds of waste per year that is being produced by just the employees of the Catholic Church. So people that should be conscious of environmental issues but may not realize the harm of their own actions. So this is just an example of how much just one organization of impact can have. It's not a definite number. Some people may waste more than others. Some people may not waste anything at work. But it's an estimate, and if they can divert that amount of waste going to landfills, if we can install compost, you can't imagine the amount of methane that would not be trapped into the environment, that would not produce these greenhouse gases. So it has a huge impact on the community, and it can drastically affect climate change. If we had every church in America, every church in North America following these guidelines, there would be a dramatic effect. And I think other organizations will also hop onto this kind of ideology of zero waste. And this also plays into that carbon reduction as well.
Now that we've gone through the core ideologies, strengths, opportunities, benefits, and examples of the strategic sustainability tools, I'm ready to give the organization my recommendation. My first recommendation for implementing these strategies and achieving the goals at hand would be for the organization to be more public about the climate crisis and the actions that they want to take. I think this is important so it doesn't come as much as a shock for people when these tools are implemented. Next, going into the workforce and going into the parishes, I think it's a good idea to get employees engaged. I recommend that supervisors and leaders go to their employees and ask for their ideas and thoughts about these goals. Employees often want to be involved with brainstorming and problem solving. Bob Willard talks about this in his book, The New Sustainability Advantage. Companies that connect people to their passions and enable them to make a significant contribution to causes they care about as human beings will see a direct correlation to higher levels of engagement and significant business benefits. After employees, I think it's important to educate the community as a whole. So parishioners and the school and employees too, if they haven't been at this point. Without adequate resources for the community, people will be confused and concerned about where their money is going and why their community is changing so drastically. Zero waste is not really a delicate thing to be implemented. So this is definitely something that will have to be explained in depth for people to understand and for it to make sense. Next, I think it will be good for not only the employees to implement these teams, but also churches, schools, and communities to form some sort of green team or a Pope Francis club. This allows people who are passionate about this problem to come together and create their own solutions. So sometimes those people will actually find solutions to their own parish's problems. So that prevents the need to invest in a consultant to come in and do a life cycle analysis, or they find a community within each other and causes them to stay within the church or something else. I think it's important to create that community because it makes more sense for people then. Next, if an LCA hasn't been done by now, I think a life cycle assessment should be done for each part of the organization. Although it might be an investment, I think there will be a huge return on this to have those numbers and statistics. And then lastly, I think it will be a good idea for this organization to be more present and more on top of things when it comes to community activism. So showing up to marches and strikes, creating community events, learning about composting, things like that. So the more the face of the church is shown within these problems in this world, it's the more people start to respect the church again, and people will start to knock down the stigma that the Catholic Church doesn't care about social justice issues. So I think that'll be a great benefit to them, and ultimately will bring some people back to the church.